The savings are scorching during the Red Hot Sale event at Omaha Steaks. Save 50% site-wide on legendary steaks, everyday essentials, and more. Plus, get an extra $35 off with code HOTSALE at omahasteaks.com. Shop now to save 50% site-wide on steaks and more during the Red Hot Sale event at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get an extra $35 off with code HOTSALE at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com, code HOTSALE. Minimum purchase may apply. See site for details.
A warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got yet another conference preview for you today as we're taking a look at the SWAC, a conference that has been known for getting a lot of 16 seeds into the NCAA tournament, but this year might be a little bit different. We've got some very good teams towards the top of the SWAC. We'll certainly be looking at those rosters, all of the coaching changes, and we had quite a few coaching changes in segment number 2 with Herbert Seward. He does great work with the HBCU Digital Network. He does great work covering HBCU hoops. He also does a great job on the college football front as well, taking a look at all things HBCU football as well. He's going to be joining me as he has the last few off seasons for this podcast, and we're going to be looking at all 12 teams, all the coaching changes, and so much more. Here in segment number 1, we're going to be diving in on the styles of play of the SWAC. We're going to take a look at the betting trends that we've gotten in the SWAC as well, and then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for this wonderful conference. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. EdgeBoost is making sure that 100% of gambling transactions do indeed get approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's take a look at a SWAC that had quite a few up-tempo teams last season. Now, Alabama A&M might be looking a little bit different because Dante Jackson is going to be taking over what was the fastest team in the conference last year. They were 9th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and Grambling was 292nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, one of the slowest teams in the conference. So we might be seeing quite a bit of a turnaround there, but still a lot of teams that they like to run it and gun it. If you take a look at the other Alabama school in terms of this conference at Alabama State, they were 124th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. With Arkansas Pine Bluff, you know that these guys are going to gun it. They were 20th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Mississippi Valley State has been a really slow school, and it's just sad what we've seen from them over the last few seasons. 296th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but Texas Southern has really cranked up their tempo in recent years. Last year, they were up to number 33 in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game, so certainly a team that is looking to get out there. They're looking to be a little bit more demonstrative with regards to their style, so that's very intriguing to see. Alcorn State is also going to be going through a little bit of a coaching change as well, and for Alcorn State last season, they were about 286th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. They've got a Florida State assistant coming in, so probably going to be seeing a little bit of a tick up with regards to that tempo as well. And then Florida A&M, they were 193rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, so right around even Steven. And now they have their coach Patrick Curry going on over to Grambling, so we can suspect that Grambling probably going to be somewhere between A and B. And when it comes to this conference, there is really a lack of three-point shooting is something that I have very much noticed with a lot of these teams, as Arkansas Pine Bluff was actually a team that made a few threes last year, but they were still 323rd in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Alabama A&M was 326th in the country. Alabama State, who represented the conference in the NCAA tournament, they were a little bit more respectable at 236th, but just not a lot of guys are able to go out there, bomb it from three. This is very much a conference that is built around big men, is built around trying to be able to get the ball to the hole. Southern was 309th in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Texas Southern was actually much better than they typically are. Texas Southern is typically one of your worst teams in all of college basketball in terms of three-point shooting percentage. They got up to 206th last season, so That was a good sign for them. Mississippi Valley State, as you can suspect, they were one of your lesser teams in terms of this. They're 56th in the country in terms of their overall three-point shooting percentage. That should come as a shock to absolutely nobody whatsoever. So you had a lot of teams that were really struggling from three-point range, and just a lot of turnovers in general as one of the big hallmarks of this conference, and one of the things that these teams have really gotten right, being able to generate turnovers. As in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, Southern has really become one of the best teams in all of college basketball in this regard. They were number 20 in the country with this. Prairie View A&M has always been a team that has been pretty solid in terms of being able to generate turnovers as well. A little bit down last season, but still, they were able to get out there. They were able to be pretty demonstrative in terms of being able to force the issue. 42nd in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and Alabama A&M really cranked it up as well. Again, they're going to be bringing in Grambling's coach after they were 22nd in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but Grambling was still a top 100 team with this regard. They were 94th in the country, and well, for Grambling, that might take a fall off as Patrick Curry, who comes in from Florida A&M, they were 299th in the country with that regard, and Mississippi Valley State, shock, surprise, surprise, they weren't one of those teams that generated a lot of turnovers. 317th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. So our poor friends over there and a little bit of a tough time with it. And then this is a conference as well that you're going to be able to get a lot of second and third chances with regards to some of your missed shots, as well as you did have quite a few teams actually do a solid job of being able to fight their way for some second and third chances on the glass. Alabama A&M was one of the main of them, 74th in the country in terms of percentage of their missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. Now, Prairie View just bottom 10 in the country with regards to their overall rebound rate. They were 329th with this regard to Mississippi Valley State, just no rebounding here whatsoever as well. But you've got other teams that do a nice job of being able to fight for those second and third chances, like Alcorn State last season was 53rd in the country in terms of their percentage of their missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. Florida A&M, again, 260th, left a little bit of something to be desired there, and the big thing is there is going to be a lot of those opportunities because a lot of these teams, they put a lot of stock into being able to get those second and third chances, but they do allow you to be able to get those second and third chances. And I mean, for Bethune-Cookman, they're a team that's going to be generating a lot of turnovers as they bring back their main backcourt from 2 seasons ago. If you look last season, they weren't as great in terms of being able to generate turnovers, but 2 years ago, they were a top 20 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and they were actually a halfway decent team on the defensive rebounding front. They were 220th in the country, which doesn't sound amazing, but when you consider that Prairie View A&M, in terms of percentage of opponents' missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound, they allowed opponents to grab 38% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. Guess what? Out of 364 teams, that was 364th. Mississippi Valley State, they allowed 37.2% of those missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. They were 362nd. Arkansas Pine Bluff, they allowed 33.9%. That was 357th in all of college basketball. So your bad teams were really bad with that regard. Even Alabama A&M was 346th in the country. So you've got a lot of your teams in this conference just allowing a lot of second and third chance opportunities. Alcorn State was 310th in the country in terms of percentage of missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. Florida A&M was 305th in the country with this regard. So, I mean, if you wanted second and third chances, if you face off against a SWAC school, you were certainly going to be able to get those. And if you take a look at the overall betting trends that we saw out there in the SWAC, obviously you have quite a few teams that, well, they got a little bit land-based against the spread. Mississippi Valley State has just become a big giant punching bag. And before you say, oh, you're being mean to Mississippi Valley State, well, against the spread last year, they went 12-17, just not profitable. Alabama A&M was just atrocious. 8-20 against the spread. It wasn't the worst mark in all of college basketball, but boy, it was not far from it. As for Alabama A&M, only Eastern Washington had a worse against the spread record, and they were tied with Cal State Fullerton, who went 8-21-1 against the spread. But they also housed the best team against the spread last year, Florida A&M. Patrick Crary did wonders with this team. They had their best win percentage since the 2007-2008 season. How about 23-7 against the spread? They were so good as underdogs, so that was rock solid. And then you also had Jackson State be pretty solid against the spread. They and Alcorn State hit at north of 58.5% of their games against the spread, 20-14 against the spread for Jackson State. Alcorn State 17-12 against the spread. But the only other team that was above 500 was Bethune-Cookman, 18-14-1 against the spread. Lots of teams that were hovering right around about 40-47% against the spread. Texas Southern was 12-18 against the spread. Mississippi Valley State, Arkansas Pine Bluff, they were 12-17 against the spread. Prairie View was 13-18, 13-16 for Southern, and then Grambling was 14-17 against the spread. As these teams just did not do a great job of being able to cover as favorites. Florida A&M did 7-0 against the spread. They were rock solid. And then Jackson State, 11-6 against the spread. Yeah, Bethune-Cookman go 8-6 against the spread, and then Florida A&M was 4-3, but for Southern, 8-12 against the spread is a favorite. Mississippi Valley State just didn't find themselves as a favorite, so no mark there. Grambling was 4-11 against the spread as a favorite. Alabama State was 7-12 against the spread as a favorite, and then Prairie View 1-5 against the spread as a favorite. That was just absolutely dismal, and you'll notice out there in the SWAC, it's a little bit more spread out than it has been in past years as well, with the likes of a Florida A&M being able to come in. You've got a lot of Southern schools that they just travel all about. It's not as bad a travel as you're going to find in a lot of other conferences. It's pretty much the way that you take a look at the SEC minus like Oklahoma and some of those very, very northern SEC schools like Missouri. That's pretty much what the layout is. And you had 3 teams above 500 against the spread on the road. Florida A&M was 12-5 against the spread. Elkhorn State 11-8-2, and then Bethune-Cookman 10-8-1 against the spread on the road. Alabama A&M was a shocking 1-13. Like, man, they covered 1 game out of 14 against the spread on the road. Not so savory there. Arkansas Pine Bluff was 7-12 against the spread on the road. Mississippi Valley State 6-14 against the spread on the road. Home court advantage was very big in the SWAC, and as you know, with the SWAC, you obviously got the great band, so you do get a great vibe. Even though you might not have like 50,000 fans there or anything like that, you get the vibe there. It's just absolutely magnificent, and these teams as underdogs were able to cover quite well as well, especially when you could get a home underdog. Now, Alabama A&M 4-18 against the spread as an underdog was not withholding to that. Texas Southern 5-11 against the spread as an underdog. The actual Southern was 5-4 against the spread as an underdog. Arkansas Pine Bluff 11-16 against the spread as a dog. Mississippi Valley State 12-17 because, well, all their games were as an underdog. But yeah, Grambling go 10-6 against the spread as a dog. Elkhorn State 13-8-2 against the spread as a dog. Alabama State 9-6-1 against the spread as an underdog. So you had some rock solid teams there, and typically with these SWAC teams, they are finding themselves grabbing a whole bunch of points against the spread in non-conference games, and they were able to make you a little bit of money outside the conference, aside from really your bottom 3 schools. Mississippi Valley State 3-8 against the spread as an underdog, even though they were grabbing like 30 points in every game. Alabama A&M 2-8 against the spread in non-conference play. Texas Southern 2-9 against the spread in non-con play, and then Arkansas Pine Bluff 4-7 against the spread outside the conference. Jackson State was 6-7 here, and then you had 2 teams at 500, Southern and Prairie View, but Alabama State outside the conference 7-6-1 against the spread. Bethune-Cookman 7-5 against the spread. 6-4-2 was that mark for Elkhorn State against the spread outside the conference. Grambling was 6-4, and then Florida A&M high water mark 7-3 against the spread. And when it comes to taking a look at the totals out here in the SWAC, very, very unique to say the least, because I mentioned all the up-tempo teams and the lack of three-point shooting, and that resulted in a bunch of unders. Jackson State was the only team that was profitable to the over, because Alabama A&M did play more overs than unders, but 15 overs to 14 unders on a minus 110 spread, that would not be profitable at 51.7%. You need at least 52.38% to be profitable, and Jackson State was 18 overs to 16 unders, and then you had Florida A&M 15 overs, 15 unders. They were even Steven, but 3 teams at 60% to the under. Elkhorn State 12 overs, 18 unders, and a push. Same mark for Grambling, and then Alabama State 14 overs to 21 unders. Mississippi Valley State 12 overs to 17 unders, 13 overs to 16 unders for Southern, 12 overs, 16 unders, and 2 pushes to Texas Southern, 14 overs, 17 unders for Prairie View, and then Arkansas Pine Bluff, Bethune-Cookman. They both played 1 more under than they did overs, and if you're looking at how things really manifested themselves in conference play, it was just an underpalooza. Jackson State was the only team that was above 500 to the over in conference games. 13 overs and 8 unders in conference play. Florida A&M a perfect 10-10, so I'm 50-50 there. And then you had, I believe it was 7 different teams hit at least 63% of their games to the under in conference play. Prairie View 12 unders to 7 overs. Texas Southern 11 unders, 6 overs and 2 pushes. Grambling 13 unders and over a push and 7 overs, and then 12 unders to 6 overs for Arkansas Pine Bluff, Mississippi Valley State, and Elkhorn State, with a push thrown in there for Elkhorn State, and then 15 unders and 6 overs to Alabama State. So very underwhelming conference to say the least, but we're going to be overwhelmed by the wealth of information coming up next from Herbert Seward. He does great work over at the HBCU Digital Network, and he joins me next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, and out a part of the Beast Family Podcast, the SWAC Conference Preview Edition. Good Love You Live Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's a SWAC Conference Preview Edition, and we have to get this man aboard. He's joined me the last few seasons for this conference preview, and he does an absolutely tremendous job covering all things HBCU football and basketball. He's over there at the HBCU Digital Network. He contributes over at FanSided and so much more. As we've got Herbert Seward aboard. If you remember him, he did a great job covering the MEAC with myself a few weeks ago, so I had to get him back on for this podcast. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at HHL Seward, which is his last name spelled SEWARD, the number 3 altogether. And Herbert, great to get you aboard, my friend. Thank you.
Hey, thank you again for having me, man. This is always a blast being able to do these conference previews with you.
Absolutely. And I think that you know as well as I do, the SWAC has gotten a lot of 16 seeds into the NCAA tournament. I think this year could be very different, and I look at this team right here, and I don't know if they quite win the conference, but I love the way that they've got guys coming back, and that'd be Jackson State. Mo Williams, who I remember very well because I'm a Bucks fan. He used to play for the Milwaukee Bucks, has done a good job ever since he took over this program, but to bring back a trio of good scorers, Jamie Mitchell, Dorian McMillan, and Deshaun Ruffin, a former top 50 recruit, I really like this team. Have a few question marks about them down low, but I look at this backcourt, forget about the SWAC, one of the better mid-major backcourts, in my opinion, that you're going to find at the lower levels.
Agreed. That one name that you mentioned, Deshaun Ruffin, he spent a good deal of last season just trying to find his footing. But, yeah, the talent's there, undeniably. The SWAC doesn't normally see McDonald's All-American caliber talent. The fact that Mo Williams was able to land him there speaks volumes about his ability to kind of reach out to grassroots connections in the state and to get folks to come home. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I think the talent that they got, they're going to be interesting to watch. They're going to be interesting to see how that progresses as the season goes on. The big thing with Jackson, though, as you mentioned before, is how they're going to replace the production down low. Losing folks like Shannon Grant, some of those folks, it's going to be interesting to see how he replaces that production.
Yep, no question about it. Down low, it might be a little bit of an adventure for Jackson State, but when you've got that sort of a backcourt out there in the SWAC, that is going to play very well. And then we take a look at this team, and I think that's fair to say they just don't have the resources that you're going to find with a lot of other Division I schools, and that'd be Mississippi Valley State. I know that George Ivory has been doing his darndest to be able to get things risen up for this program, but feels like every single time they get a top flight scorer, they lose them via the transfer portal. And I think for Mississippi Valley State, the biggest thing for the team is just trying to be able to find a little bit more of an identity and just being able to try to hone in on being able to find one or two guys that they're able to build around the next few years, because it's just felt like whenever they've gotten a guy that becomes a go-to scorer, they just bolt and transfer on elsewhere.
I think that's a big problem with Valley, but I also think part of that issue is just that with Valley being the second program in that state, within the conference, they have a lot of opponents to recruit against in the state, whether we're talking about, Ole Miss or Jackson State, or even Division II Delta State down the road, Mississippi College. A lot of the talent that they could draw from, there in that Delta area, goes to other places, either other places in the state or other places out of state. And I think, George Ivory has a challenging job in front of him in terms of just really building that program and developing talent. I think there is a chance for them within a 3 to 4 year span to start really, tapping into high school connections and stuff there. But he's really going to have to rely on the JUCOs to really provide that type of stability. And you're absolutely right. Whenever they've been able to get, I know they had some Canadian imports over the past few years that have been real impact players for them that have, just spent a cup of coffee in the conference and then ended up going to another place. It's going to be a challenge for them, but I'm still really interested in seeing, what Ivory does now that he's kind of had a season or two under his belt and, just to establish the culture there. But yeah, it's going to be a real challenge for Valley to see exactly how that goes down.
Yep, absolutely. They are certainly going to be facing an uphill battle, and this program does a little bit as well. As Arkansas Pine Bluff has had their ups and downs, but I will say for Arkansas Pine Bluff, even though it didn't necessarily result in a lot of wins, at the very least, some exciting basketball, lots of three-pointers, and they no longer have Dr. Bradley. We'll get to him a little bit later, as the doctor is still in the house with regards to the SWAC. That said, though, Derek Magwood is a guy that's coming in from Southeast Arkansas that absolutely tore it up. 19 points per contest. He's a guy that I really like. They're going to be bringing back Kyle Brown from last year as well. Pine Bluff, without question, they're going to be a little bit limited down low. They're going to be losing the battle on the glass in a lot of games, but I think the best thing that Arkansas Pine Bluff has going for them is that they play a fun brand of basketball. And that, in my opinion, is going to lead to more recruits coming in. And I think that Coach Bozeman has, at the very least, done a good job of setting up Pine Bluff as a place where more guys want to go to because they know that they're going to be able to put it up.
Yeah, offensively, I don't think that's Pine Bluff's problem. And yeah, Dr. Bradley staying in conference, that's a killer. I mean, to me, because that guy was, really, on the cusp of really being. He was already an all-conference caliber talent last year, when he was playing in limited time for UAPB. And he could have really, changed the profile of this team this year if he had stayed in the fold. But, one thing that UAPB has done consistently is find really good guard talent. And the transfers they got coming in, the young man that you just mentioned from Arkansas State that, 19 points a game average, I don't care where you're at, that is, that's a legit scoring option that you can have come in and really take advantage of what's going on. I think UAPB, if they can really translate things on the defensive end to complement the offensive, their offensive efficiency, I think they'll be fine. But I think ultimately the big question is whether or not they're going to find the type of offensive balance to really be, competitive in conference. I think they will, but conversely, what they do defensively may just tell the tale. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see once we get into preseason, see how this roster shapes up for them. Yeah, I mean, some of the movement from some of these squads in conference is going to be really interesting to see the more we talk about the conference.
Oh, no question about it. As joining me on the show, you've got Herbert Seward. He does a great job over the HBCU Digital Network and FanSided, joining me for the SWAC Conference Preview Edition here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I know that the Bart Torvik rankings have these guys relatively low, but I see a lot of upside here with Prairie View A&M, just because, for one, they play a very distinct style. They're one of the best teams in all of college basketball at generating turnovers. And two, Tayron Joseph. It was a small sample size 2 years ago, but that guy was averaging 20 points per game over at Southern. That is a guy that is a walking bucket. They bring in Doug Young on over from the Metro Atlantic. He was playing over at Quinnipiac, if I'm not mistaken. They bring back Marcel Bryant from a season ago. They don't necessarily have a ton of size. That's never been the MO of Prairie View, but that said, they've got a lot of guards. They've got a lot of guys that are going to seek out the ball, and bringing in a guy in Joseph that where if he could get a clean bill of health and do what he did over at Southern a few years ago, lots of upside, in my opinion, for Prairie View.
Yeah, that's one of the many steals that we've seen in conference in terms of retaining talent within the conference. Anybody that saw Joseph with the backcourt that Southern had a few years back with Toussaint, he's transferred out of the program at Southern University. They were potent. And he is the type of offensive talent that Prairie View's, quite honestly has had their opportunities to really cultivate and develop over the years. I think ultimately, though, it's going to be a return to, the type of philosophy that, Prairie View is used to playing, really, really tough defense, really extending pressure at the guard spots at 1, 2, and 3 spots, and really making teams earn those things defensively, as well as getting out in transition and utilizing that. Having Joseph the guy's a wired scorer. And you kind of said it yourself. He's averaging close to 20 points a game at Southern. He's the type of guy that can get to spots whenever he wants on the court. He can score at all 3 levels, and it's going to be really, really cool to see him, against SWAC talent again, but at the same time in a completely different system that's going to really force him to utilize that entire tool bag that he has, because I think he's an all SWAC caliber type of talent. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this Prairie View product looks. I think they could be my sleeper, or at least one of them, because the parity in the conference this year is going to be crazy. Again, and this is going to be a recurring MO for a lot of teams this year, is what they get from the 4 and 5 spots, what they get on the block. Because if you can get any sample of rebounding, rim protection defense, where you can really build defenses around the defensive philosophies around those guys, it'll make the difference. Alabama State was a really good example of that last year, and that they rode that all the way to the NCAA tournament.
Absolutely. And you mentioned needing to be able to get some production down low. When he was over at Grambling, Dante Jackson's team always seems like they got something down low. Now he's over at Alabama A&M, though, and he brings with him a few of his friends. Contavious Dozier, who is so good in the backcourt with about 12.5 points per contest. He's going to be coming on over. Lewis Hutchinson, he's going to be coming back as well. They've got James Flippin, who I always like to say he's pretty flipping good down low. He was able to give the team 7.5 points per contest. And Sammy Pasisis, hopefully I said that correct, from New Hampshire, guy that's able to give you 16 points per contest, albeit it was a New Hampshire team that had a little bit of a rough go of it, but 16 points per game is 16 points per game. And with Alabama A&M, I don't know if they're going to be quite doing hockey-style line changes like they were last season, where it felt like they were playing 12 guys a game, but I mean, bringing in a guy in Jackson, I think is really going to be able to help out this team, and he knows how to coach in the conference, and being able to bring in a guy like that, I think is massive for this program.
I have Alabama A&M as one of my favorites in the conference for a couple of reasons. One, as you said, Dante Jackson is a proven commodity. The philosophy he uses in terms of getting the most out of his basketball teams when he was at Grambling, really, really tough half-court defense, really big squads. If you've seen those front courts over the years, those front courts have been absolutely monstrous by SWAC standards, and they've been tough. You don't beat those guys on the glass. They don't really beat themselves defensively in the half court, and you have to work for everything. Having a lot of those guys come back, and really follow him to Huntsville is great. I think there are going to be some newcomers that are going to make the difference for them offensively. That's always been the big rub with Dante Jackson squads, is that, outside of maybe 1 or 2 points of production, offensive production has been inconsistent. And when you get into slugfest where you have an equally, potent defensive team, and you just need that go-to guy to get buckets whenever you need to get to, or to break down defenses, it's been an issue. Contavious Dozier goes a long way to alleviate a lot of those. He's been amongst the best at the point guard position since he's been at Grambling in the SWAC and that mid-major level. Guy's tough. I think it's going to be really interesting. Defensively, I think this is going to be one of the better defensive teams in the conference, point blank. The question is where they're going to get scoring from, how consistent that scoring is going to be, and, how diversified that those offensive sets are going to be. I really wouldn't, place my bets against Coach Jackson as regards to finding a solution to that, because you're talking about an NCAA tournament coach, point blank. The guy's really, really good at what he does.
And this guy showed that he's very good at what he does as well, because Grambling had to replace Mr. Jackson, and they bring in a man in Patrick Curry that led Florida A&M to their highest win percentage since the 2007-8 season. They bring in Paul McMillan. Once again, Canisius didn't have a lot of success, but 20 points per game is 20 points per game. He brings in PJ Easton. He retains him, who was able to give the team 6 rebounds per game. Salou C.A., hopefully I got that correct. He actually comes over from Alabama A&M, ironically enough. True 7-footer that's able to give you a block per contest, and it just feels like with Grambling, maybe they aren't going to be necessarily that team as number 1 in the conference, but just feels like they're one of the most balanced teams in this conference.
I'll go a step further, man. I think they're not just one of the most balanced teams. I think they're amongst the most talented, top 2 or 3 talented rosters in the conference. Patrick Curry, the job that he did under, dare I say, dubious circumstances at Florida A&M was incredible. It was analytics driven, and he really, really got the most out of the kids that he had there. And, for a team that really didn't have that much success at all prior to him coming, he had those guys in the, right in the hunt for regular season championship and the NCAA tournament bid by winning, the conference tourney. Going to Grambling was the steal of the offseason for, amongst SWAC programs. Not necessarily just because of the job he did at Florida A&M, but just the manner in that he did it. A lot of his stuff is analytics driven. He's really big on analytics, where to get shots out at, offensive percentages, who gets what. It tells by the way they play. And, with some of the folks that he's got, that he's been able to pull, he also had some, folks come over to him from Florida A&M. I think Pat Coffey came over with him as well from Florida A&M, and a couple other folks. Paul McMillan, the fourth, is, to me, he's an all-SWAC guy, and he's an early candidate for a SWAC Player of the Year. He's that talented. Anybody that's seen him at his previous home, he's a wired scorer, and he's going to really, really be a great boon for a Grambling program that's got a lot of potential. I think this conference is going to be a 2-3 team, maybe 4-team race on paper. And obviously it's early, but, this Grambling squad has got a lot. They've got a lot of talent, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that talent gels as the season goes.
And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how this team gels as well, because with Texas Southern, we know that when they've been at their best under Johnny Jones, it's because they've been rock solid down low. And it felt like over the last year or two, it was a little bit more hit or miss, but they retained so many of the guys from last year. Kobe Granger is back. Jalen Jackson Posey. I remember how good of a three-point shooter he was at Stephen F. Austin is back. They bring in Troy Hupstead as well. You know him very well from his time at Maryland Eastern Shore when he had a nice season there 2 years ago as well. He's going to be able to add a little bit more down low. With Texas Southern, I don't know if they quite duplicate the three-point shooting from a season ago, but it feels like they're getting back to their roots, really having a lot of size down low. Josh Farmer is an upside guy at 6'10" that I think is going to be able to hit the glass, and I feel like for Texas Southern, they're going to do a nice job on defense, and this is one of those teams I think could surprise a lot of people after they were maybe a little bit off the radar after last year's, shall we say, a little bit of a down year for them.
Yeah, I think they're back in the saddle in terms of being in the mix for a SWAC regular season title. There was one notable transfer, that's Latavius Mortal, shooting guard, combo guard out of Louisiana, that ended up transferring out of the program. Extremely athletic, was really poised to have a breakout year for them if he had stayed in the program. That being said, I think Texas Southern has been the standard, along with Grambling over the past few years, in terms of, what this conference can expect in terms of, programs being contention for SWAC supremacy. And I think they get back to it. I think the staff of Texas Southern has really done a good job in shoring up a lot of the deficiencies that they had last year. Although I think it was their 3-point shooting percent, prowess last year, I don't think it was an aberration. I think some of the folks they have come in can replicate or at least approach what they did. Now, mind you, I think the type of scoring that they did down the stretch of the season was incredible. It's going to be hard. They're going to be hard pressed to replicate that. But I think they have enough there on that roster to really be a very potent offensive team. And they're going to be in a mix. They're going to be in a mix for a regular season title, and they're going to be in a mix for, be a threat to make a run in the tourney. It's exciting to see Texas Southern, get back to where they need to get back to. The SWAC really isn't a SWAC without a really good Texas Southern squad. I think they get back to that this year.
Oh, no doubt about it. I do like this Texas Southern team for this upcoming season. Also love having Herbert Seward aboard for this SWAC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And this is a team that just over the last few years, they've been rock solid in the SWAC, have yet to really be able to bust through, make that NCAA tournament run, but that'd be Alcorn State. They do have a little bit of a changing of the guard at coach. They bring in Jake Morton, the assistant from Florida State, but I feel like a lot of the things that we expect from Alcorn State are going to remain the same. Maybe they don't have that guy that's going to give you like 15 plus points per game, but they're always rock solid. They're always relatively deep, and bringing in a guy like a Day-Day Hunter from New Orleans, who is a relatively good three-point shooter, that's going to help them out. Bringing back Omari Hamilton, I thought was relatively large as well. They bring in Nick Woodyard, who is solid over at Stony Brook, and luckily enough, they lose their coach at Chicago State. They bring in Saxby Sutherland from Chicago State as well, so they got back at them a little bit. I look at this Alcorn State team, and I felt like they did a solid job in the transfer portal. I like Morton as a rock-solid hire, and I think that for Alcorn State, maybe they're not going to be like the top 2, top 3 of the conference, but I don't think despite the coaching change that they're fading away anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't think they will. Losing Landon Bussey was big because Landon Bussey was the de facto face of that program for the time that he was there. An excellent coach. The fact that, Chicago State was able to snag him, was a blow indeed, but I think they got an adequate replacement in Morton. And it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of identity Alcorn State has on both ends of the floor, defensively, offensively. I mean, it's going to be kind of hard to put a finger on, what that's going to be until we actually see them in preseason. And preseason coming up pretty soon. I know I'll be able to get my eyes on them when they do, as they do their overseas tours and stuff, and, start doing exhibitions so we can get an idea of who's going to go to what. What's going to be really important for Alcorn, again, is establishing that culture and that identity early. Because by the time conference play gets around, if it's not established, that could be a recipe for some unfortunate times for Alcorn State fans. But I think the biggest replacement at coach I think they knocked it out the park. I think, Morton is going to be an extremely effective coach. How fast he implements his ideas, his systems, his philosophy is going to make all the difference. It's going to make all the difference in terms of how well Alcorn State does in the regular season and whether they make the postseason tournament. And I'm looking forward to seeing that growth. I don't think this is going to be a bad season for them. I think it's going to be a middle of the conference type of season for them, but a very productive one.
I'm very much in the same mindset of you with Alcorn State. I see them being more towards the middle of the conference. I don't think that they challenge for like the top three or anything like that, but I think that they're going to be rock solid. And we've seen Alabama State make some runs over the last few years. Now, unfortunately, the father-son duo in Tony and TJ Madlock has been split up because TJ just out of eligibility, but they do bring back Micah Simpson. Just Stephen Walker is also back from a season ago as well. They have Mario Andrews in there. And then I really love Tyler Bird, who comes in from Northeast Mississippi Community College. He was a 17-point per game scorer, and you don't find this in the conference too often. A nice impact transfer like Ajon Anderson. He's going to be coming in over from Queens NC. I think that he's going to be solid right away for Alabama State. I just don't know if there's going to be the same firepower as you'd had with the father-son duo with TJ Madlock running the offense. They were one of the most efficient offenses in terms of not turning the ball over in all of college basketball, but I think that for Alabama State, they've done a nice job of replacing that and did a nice job in the portal this offseason.
Those portal pieces are going to have to produce early. And I say this admittedly, I have a little bit more stake with Alabama State being an Alabama State alum and following the squad a whole lot. I think there's some other big losses. Sean Fulcher, he was kind of set to take over that point guard position. He transferred out. Martin Knox, who was lights out, at times during the year last year, he transferred out. So the guard rotation that is returning is going to be counted on to do a lot if they're going to maintain the high pressure style that, Tony Matlock, has really kind of established there. And I mean, there's not really any other way to cut it, but losing CJ Hines and TJ Matlock hurts. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they replace that production and that stability, at those two spots, particularly TJ Matlock, because he was kind of a Swiss Army knife. He could play anywhere from slot 2 to slot 5 at times. How they do that, I think just Stephen Walker grows a bit and makes a jump, and he has the potential to be a really good impact player for them, a swing player at the 3 and the 4 position. He has to get in the weight room and put on a little bit more weight to really, deal with the rigors of regular season play in the SWAC that kind of told on him. I think some of the fundamental foundation blocks are there. How those new pieces are going to translate, whether, the JUCO transfers that are coming into the program are going to really be able to replicate the scoring proficiency they had at their regular locations, in the SWAC is going to be interesting. I'm really, really intrigued on how this edition of the Alabama State University basketball team is going to look. The floor could be, lower middle half of the conference. The ceiling could be another regular season and, tournament season title. That just goes to the quality of Coach Matlock and his staff. But, I would be remiss to mention that the fact that Alabama State had one of the more memorable moments in the NCAA tournament last year, is a boon for the conference in general. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them build on that. And I think, that victory went a long way to recruiting for them this year. So, yeah, I'm excited to see what the end product's going to be.
Yep, absolutely. With Alabama State, a little bit of changing of the guard in the backcourt, but we know that the coaching is going to be rock solid there. As Herbert Seward, who does great work over at the HBCU Digital Network, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And this team, they didn't have that one dominant scorer last year, but man, they were dominant in the conference. That'd be Southern, and they've returned so many of those guys. Joe Manning, along with AJ Barnes, Michael Jacobs, Cam Embroy. All these guys are going to be coming back. And Malik, I'm going to get this last name correct, but Abjawald, he comes on over from UMass, 6'10". He'll be able to give them a little bit of rough and tumble as well. And for Southern, I just absolutely love this style. They generate a lot of turnovers. They don't have selfish guys. They're just, for lack of a better term, a do-your-job sort of team with so many guys just working in concert with one another. And I feel like they're going to do that once again this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody that watched Southern last year, particularly early in the season and early through the middle of the conference season, when they were clicking on all cylinders, they were by far the best team in the conference, point blank. That's a testament to the job that those coaches have done in terms of establishing a style of play that is conducive to SWAC play. I think we're going to see a lot of that this year. The big knock on Southern over the years has been, they've started out strong. By the time they hit the middle of the conference season, they stumble a little bit, and they're kind of gassed out by the time the end of the regular season hits and the conference tourney hits. I think this year they have a real good chance of, flipping that script. If they can put it all together and really just keep the consistency that they've really kind of come to expect there, this is a top 3 team in the conference, if not a serious threat for an NCAA tournament bid. What they do in the out of conference is going to really be interesting too, from what I've seen in the schedule. I think they've taken a little bit of a different scheduling approach with a little bit more emphasis on regional opponents as opposed to some of the big, some of the cash money type of games that, a lot of SWAC opponents have played over the years. And I think that's a really good philosophy to take. I'm really excited to see this edition of how Southern looks. I think they're one of the favorites. I would definitely put with them, Grambling, Alabama and A&M being in that first half. One other team that we haven't talked about yet. So we're going to segue into that one.
Oh, absolutely. We'll talk about them for last. We've got one other team to talk about before them. That'd be Florida A&M. They had Patrick Crary do such a great job for them, but how do you replace them? Florida State legend Charlie Ward, who brings in Anquan Bolden, who, ironically enough, Anquan Bolden played at Florida State. His son, Anquan Bolden Jr., is now going to be starting for them, as he was able to average 8 points per game over at Buffalo last season. They bring in Micah Octave from within the conference over at Alabama State, and they do retain someone like Jordan Chapman, who's a 40% three-point shooter. They retain Caleb Washington, who is very versatile, 7 points, 4 rebounds per game, and sometimes with these big-name coaches, some of them, they really don't care about the program. Charlie Ward seems like he is all in on this Florida A&M job. It seems like he really wants to be a winner, and it almost feels like a Deion Sanders in college basketball, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think there's some different dynamics there, too. I think one thing with Charlie Ward is he's a Tallahassee guy. Besides that, he's had a substantial amount of success coaching at the high school level in the state. That's going to translate really, really well in terms of building that Florida A&M program. The fact that he was able to retain some of the pieces that he was able to retain is huge. And I think it's going to really accelerate him building out that program and his image. Again, this is one of those situations where we're going to get a really good idea of what a Charlie Ward-led Florida A&M is all about. Once those kids hit the court, do their tours overseas and start their preseason regimen. Again, the fact that they had some returners there, some of these transfers, like the kid from Buffalo, has the potential to be really impact transfer. I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued to see how his high school success is going to translate to, taking over his first Division I coaching gig. And, to be quite honest with you, I think, there's not a better place in mid-major basketball to do that than the SWAC, because, you see a lot of different types of coaching styles, a lot of diversity in terms of playing, in terms of styles of play, and there's a lot of talent, and it's an up and down type of game. So I'm really excited to see what Charlie Ward puts out there on the court. And I think it's going to surprise a lot of people. I think they have the potential to be toward the middle half of the conference, maybe shock some people, maybe, get to the upper middle half. But it's going to be a fun ride all the way, either way, because I think he's going to really get the most out of the kids that he's got there.
Absolutely, and this is going to be a fun one. We saved the best for last, in my opinion. Bethune-Cookman, because they had Jacoby Heedy and Zion Harmon be such a great backcourt duo 2 seasons ago. Both transferred out for last year. They're boomerang transfers. Those guys are back. We talked about Dr. Bradley, who led the country in free throw attempts last year and averaged 20 points per game at Arkansas Pine Bluff. He's in the fold. Ontario Morris, a former top 40 recruit, he recently, in August, decided that he was going to go to Bethune-Cookman. They bring back Daniel Ruzon down low. Like, this is a team that is one of the most talented SWAC teams I feel like I've ever seen, and this is a team that I have very high expectations for.
Yeah, you're not the only one, man. You look at this roster, it's loaded. The first thing that comes to mind when you look at the roster from top to bottom, I mentioned Dr. Bradley before. The fact that Bethune-Cookman was able to scoop him from, and keep him in conference was huge. Because not only does he give them a real post presence, and I don't mean post presence defensively as a rim protector or a rebounder. We're talking about a guy that can take over a game offensively from the block, whether facing up again, whether it's back to the basket or facing up. Daniel Ruzan being back, Jacoby Hetty. Zion Harmon, I've had a lot of familiarity with. He's from the D.C. metro area. People that are familiar with his travel. He started out of Western Kentucky. His first go-around, at Bethune-Cookman, he was an impact player there. Nice that nobody could really guard him. And the fact that he's back there under Reggie Theus's tutelage does not bode well for the rest of the conference, to be honest. Yeah, I concur with you, man. Out of all the rosters in the conference, this one by far on paper is the most talented, and it's not even close. So it's really going to be really interesting to see, how Coach Theus deploys all of this talent. Sometimes when you have that type of offensive talent on the roster, there's not enough basketballs to go around. But I don't think that's going to be the case here. I think a lot is, particularly when it comes to kids that have been in that program before and were, ended up boomeranging back to the program, it says a lot about the staff because, re-recruiting kids 2 times to the same college program doesn't happen every day. The fact that it's happened here twice says a lot about, the pull that Reggie Theus has with a lot of these talents. So the ceiling for this squad, this is my preseason prediction for SWAC regular season and tourney champion. That's the ceiling for them. Ceiling for them is the NCAA tournament bid. I would not be surprised to see these guys pull off a couple of out-of-conference upsets early because they have the talent to do it. Like I said, it's incredible to look at that roster and, think about the job that Bethune-Cookman's coaching staff has done in such a short period of time, accumulating the talent. So I'm really excited to see how this roster looks, live and in person. It's going to be a heck of a time in Daytona, and they should, fans in Daytona should appreciate what they're seeing.
Oh, absolutely. This is going to be an amazing season, Herbert. And I know you're doing great work over at Fansided, the HBCU digital network, and so much more. Herbert, just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to college basketball. And it's always great to be able to get him on the SWAC Conference Preview Edition. So big thanks, Herbert, for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VC Family Podcast. And coming next, I give you my projector of finish for the SWAC. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always a pleasure to be able to get Herbert Seward aboard. He does a great job covering the HBCU landscape, really, of both college football and college basketball. I know that he did a great job on the MEAC conference preview, which you heard a few weeks ago. He did an amazing job with this conference today. He does a tremendous job with the HBCU Hoops Weekly Show / podcast, which that's going to be getting started up in the next few weeks. HBCU Digital Network. He's doing great work there, and every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So big thanks, Herbert, for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the SWAC, as per usual, with these conference previews, because I'm doing a conference preview today. Any news and notes I miss in the last 24 hours in college basketball, I will polish those up tomorrow / on the next day in which we don't have a conference preview, because sometimes I double up, I go back to back, especially this time of year where the news and notes, it's really not rampant right now. We're probably going to be getting much more as we get into late September, early October. That's when things really get hot and heavy with regards to these preseason practices, with regards to these, and I air quotes here, secret scrimmages, which results in a few injuries, things like that. So we're going to be on the lookout there, and we're on the lookout in terms of dead last in my projector finish, and this should come as a shock to absolutely nobody whatsoever. We're going to be going with Mississippi Valley State. My goodness. They got a few wins last season, yay, verily there, but you don't really have any sort of talent on this team. I wish I could put it any other way. They actually returned quite a few minutes from last season. Antonio Sisk is a guy that saw some meaningful minutes for them last season. He was able to make some contributions. He was able to put in there in that neighborhood about 6 points per contest. He generated a steal per game, but they just can't retain anyone that's worth their soul whatsoever. Like Arthur Tate is out of the fold. Donovan Sanders a few years ago was really good at being able to generate steals, but now he's out of the fold, and They're relying upon a bunch of guys that played at the non-Division I level a few years ago. Rashawn McGarry is another guy that is going to be back. Actually, Rashawn McGregory, my own name, as he was able to average about 3 points per contest as a starter for the team last season. Guess there might be a little bit of upside, and I know that George Ivory has put everything into this program as humanly possible. This is just, it feels like an impossible place to win. I wish I could call it anything else, but I mean, it's just a downtrodden team that they were outscored by an average of 26.5 points per game last season, and that's with having 2 wins against non-Division I teams included in there. If you only take the Division I games, they got outscored by darn near 30 points per game. So it's a one match in a dark cave right now for Mississippi Valley State. I've got them dead last in my projector finish, and we move on to number 11, which is Arkansas Pine Bluff, another team that is really going through it right now. We've seen Solomon Bozeman actually provide a little bit of brightness. This is a team that at the very least they were playing some exciting basketball last year. Much of it is because they were a bottom 5 team in the country in terms of their defense. Man, they were not great there. And this is a team that they just turn the ball over too much as well. They very much seek out the 3-point shot in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. This was a team that was in the bottom 20 in all of college basketball. They're 340th in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They do bring back Kyle Brown, who was able to give the team 7 points, 3 rebounds per game last season, and Derek Magwood is actually a very good upside guy from Southeast Arkansas, non-Division I school, 19 points, 9.5 boards, a block per contest at 6'8". He should be able to come in right away and give this team a little bit of versatility, but that said, you're looking at just Sean Hayes, who he's coming in as a freshman, and there's actually like 2 Hayeses that are coming in as brothers that are going to be looking to really elevate this team, but you really just don't have much Division I experience on this roster. They're going to be relying upon someone like Dennis Osoro, who is back from a season ago, but really didn't see a whole heck of a lot of playing time for the team. They have to turn over their roster year in and year out, and with Osoro, he was able to give the team like 3.5 points per contest. Should be able to give them a little bit of something down low. I think that they avoid the complete seller because Mississippi Valley State is that bad, but again, this is a very rough go of it for Arkansas Pine Bluff. I've got them at number 11 in terms of my projector finish. At number 10, I'm going to be going with Alabama A&M. Alabama A&M last season was really making hockey-style line shifts, but they're a little bit too aggressive, and they do a nice job of getting to the free throw line. They were a top 40 team in the country in terms of free throw attempts per game last season, but they were also outside the top 325 in terms of their free throw shooting percentage. Like, if you're going to get to the free throw line, if you're going to play this style, you need guys to be able to knock down those free throws, and they just did not have that last season. Now, they are going to be bringing in guys that have had success at the Division I level. Sammy Pacisis, hopefully I said that correct, he comes on over from New Hampshire, where he was able to do a solid job of being able to give that team right in the neighborhood of about 15.5 points per contest, 2.5 assists, but that was a New Hampshire team that was not any good last year. Katavius Dozier, he comes on over from Grambling, 12.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, so that's going to be rock solid for them as well. And James Flippin, pretty flipping good over at Grambling last year. He was able to put in there about 7.5 points per contest. And for Alabama A&M, I do think that this is a squad that's going to be a little bit better in terms of their overall shooting, as they did bring in quite a few guys that just flat out are able to put the ball in the basket, but at the same time, the defensive effort is not necessarily there. Just this style, I don't think is necessarily conducive to winning a lot of games when you just don't have the athletes to be able to do so. I do think that Dante Jackson is going to be able to do a solid job as a coach. He comes over from Grambling, so it's a big giant changeover for them, and that is going to be able to elevate this program, in my opinion. And I do think that it's going to lead to a little bit more rough and tumble with regards to the defense as well. But even going back to Jackson's time when he was over at Grambling, he never had necessarily a team that was able to pop off and was really able to bomb it from 3-point range or anything like that. So I think that this is going to be a team that's going to be very limited on the offensive side of things. They do bring back Bilal Abdul-Raham as well. Hopefully I got that one correct. He's a guy that is one of the main holdovers from a season ago, 5.5 points, 2.5 assists per contest. And Louis Hutchinson, he is another guy that comes on over with Dante Jackson from Grambling as well. Should be able to give this team a little bit of something. But I think that the overall changeover and the overall just, shall we say, newness over at Alabama A&M, I think that it's going to take a year or two for Dante Jackson to really get his style in place. So I did put Alabama A&M at number 10 in terms of my projector finish. At number 9, I'm going to be going with Alabama State. With Alabama State, Tony Madlock has done a really good job of coaching up this team. Got them to the NCAA tournament last year. Much of the success that he's had early on over at Alabama State is that he brought a lot of guys on over with them from South Carolina State, though, and now those guys are pretty much gone, including his son, TJ Madlock. They're going to be looking to Micah Simpson to be able to help elevate this team, as the top 3 scorers from last year are gone. Simpson was able to give the team 6.5 points in that backcourt last season, and he still has some relatively good size. Just Stephen Walker, 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game as a part-time starter at 6'10", 6'7". Mario Andrews was able to give the team 4.5 rebounds per game, and I'm very excited about Tyler Bird. I think that he comes in right away and he's able to be a little bit of a do-it-all sort of guy. I don't think that he's going to be as good as TJ Madlock, but 17 points, 6 boards, multiple steals per contest at Northwest Mississippi Community College last season. And as John Anderson, he was a nice role player at Queens NC, was able to put in there about 5.2 points per contest. So I do think that there are some solid players with regards to this team. At the same time, I do think that it's going to be a little bit limited as well with all the turnover. I think that that's going to be very difficult for them to be able to just really go through. And they bring in Demarion Yates. He was playing over at Memphis, but never could really get out there on the floor for them. So he's a little bit of a guy that they're taking a gamble on at 6'7". But I do think that for Alabama State, losing quite a bit of that depth from a season ago is going to be costly for them. And I think that that plummets them down the standings. So I do have with Alabama State them at number 9 in terms of my projector or finish. And number 8, I'm going to be going with Alcorn State. Alcorn State is another team that went through a coaching change in the offseason, but I do think that this is still going to be a relatively rock-solid team. And ironically enough, they lose their coach to Chicago State, and they bring in Zaxby Sutherland from Chicago State, who was able to give the team right around about 5.5 points per contest. Jameel Morris is someone that was over at Fairleigh Dickinson, 5.5 points, a steal per contest. And I think that Day Hunter coming on over from New Orleans, where he was giving the team 8.5 points, shot about 38% from 3, is going to be great. And they retained quite a few guys from last season, like Omari Hamilton is back, 7 points, 3 boards, mid-30s three-point shooter. Davion Williams was able to put in there a steal and a half, about 6 points per contest. They bring in former Florida State assistant Jake Morton to really be able to elevate this team. He really doesn't bring anyone over with him from Florida, which that would have been really nice if he would have been able to, but Nick Woodyard, he was solid over at Stony Brook last season at 6'6". He was able to supply the team with about 5 points per game. Alcorn State, going back to the older regime, was always based around just the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, being able to bring in quite a bit of depth, and I do think that they've done a solid job here. They also have Tyson McDaniels back. He's 6'8", really didn't see a ton of minutes last year, but I think that that's a guy that's able to take a stride forward for a team that has a lot of versatility, and I do think that there's quite a bit of upside with this team, especially with bringing in, I hope I say the name correctly, Aldine Bontabe, who's 7'2", comes in from the non-Division I ranks, and he's a gamble. Like, he comes in from Rider. He spent a little bit of time at the D1 ranks, spent a little bit of time at Rider. If they're able to get anything out of him whatsoever, they've got a little bit of upside here. So I did put Alcorn State at number 8 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 7, I go with Prairie View. Prairie View always has that distinct style of trying to be able to generate a lot of turnovers and just trying to make things harebrained and crazy in general, and I feel like they finally have that head of the stake that they need to officially do this, as Tayron Joseph is going to be coming in. And with Tayron Joseph, he last season was able to put in there right in the neighborhood about 9 points per contest when he was over at UTSA. Meet for the Roadrunners, but keep in mind what he did when he was last in the SWAC. During the 2023-24 season, it was a limited sample size of 19 games at Southern, but when he was over at Southern, a steal and a half and 20.5 points per game. This is the dominant scorer that this team really, really needs. They bring back Marcel Bryant from a season ago as well. This is a guy that stands right in that neighborhood about 6'7". If I'm not mistaken, he began his career over at Omaha. He was able to put in there some nice production for the team last year, right around about 10 points, 5 boards. A guy that's not really going to bomb it from 3, but at 6'7", has a little bit of versatility, active hands with a steal and a block per contest. I'm feeling relatively good about this Prairie View team. They do have one of the more distinct styles in all of college basketball, the way that they generate turnovers now. And leads to them giving up a lot of open three-point looks, and they themselves were turning the ball over a little bit too much on offense last season. That's probably going to still be the case. That's just what you get out of a Byron Smith coach Prairie View team, but that said, with Prairie View, I do think that they are going to be a little bit more rock solid. Last year, they just dealt with injuries with Nick Anderson, a 19-point per game scorer, only being out there for like 12 games. That was just doomsday for them. This is not a team that's going to do a great job on the glass. They never have been able to, but that said, I think that they're going to do a great job generating turnovers, and that'll get them towards the middle of the conference. I've got Prairie View at number 7 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 6, I go with Florida A&M. Patrick Curry led this team to their best overall win percentage since the 2007-8 season, and while he's gone, he leaves for the Grambling job. you do replace him with a Florida State legend in Charlie Ward, and he brings with him a guy that actually had his father play football over at Florida State, Anquan Bolden Jr. And Anquan Bolden is a guy that, if you know my Twitter/X feed at @GUnit_81, the 81 is for Anquan Bolden. He was my favorite NFL player when I was growing up, so a little bit of affinity here for Anquan Bolden Jr. He was the starter last year at Buffalo, about 8.3 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's going to light you up for three, not a guy that is really going to be running the offense, but I like Micah Octave and how active he is. At 6'5", a little bit undersized, he's able to do a nice job of being in his nose dirty. 5 points, 5.3 rebounds, steal and a half per contest over at Alabama State last year. They do bring back a few guys from last year's team as well. Caleb Washington, 7 points. He was able to chip in their 4 boards as a part-time starter. 6'11", Jermaine Charles was able to give you about 3.5 rebounds per game, and Jordan Chapman is the X factor. Shot 40% from 3, 9 points, 3.5 boards per contest, and then Jaquan Sanders was a bit of a part-time starter over at Hofstra. He should be able to aid this backcourt, and I think that Charlie Ward is going to turn out to be a good coach. I think that with him having so many roots out there in Florida, that's going to really help this team hit the ground running right away. So I've got Florida A&M at number 6 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 5, I'm going to be going with Grambling, as they do bring in the aforementioned Patrick Curry, who did amazing work over at Florida A&M last season, and he brings with him Roderick Huffey, who was so solid over at Florida A&M last year. Not too much of a score with only 6 points per contest, but 4 boards, 3.5 assists per game, but they do bring in a scorer in Paul McMillan. 20 points per game at Canisius. Now, didn't lead to a lot of wins for Canisius, but he's a guy that's able to put the biscuit in the basket. PJ Easton is a guy that returns from last season, 5.9 points, 5.9 boards, and a steal per contest. Darius Ward was a very solid player at Coppin State when he was out there on the floor. A limited 11-game sample size, but 13 points, 5 boards, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. And Alabama A&M 7-footer Selous CA should be able to really elevate this team down low. 5 points, 4 boards, and a block per contest. So this team has all the goods, and they've got the well-roundedness to be solid in this conference right away. Ricky Ballard, he's going to be coming in from West Georgia. He shot about 38% from three-point range as well. I fear that this might be a little bit of a top-heavy team, but I do think that Patrick Curry is going to do a rock-solid job with this team. He has NAIA roots. As a matter of fact, just 2 years ago, he was coaching over at St. Mary's out there in the state of Texas, so he knows all about just roster construction and being able to get a competitive product out there right away, and I think that Grambling does that. I've got Grambling at number 5 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 4, I go with Texas Southern. Texas Southern is going to be bringing back a lot of the base of last year's team. Kobe Granger is going to be back. You've got as well a guy in Jalen Jackson Posey. I still remember when he was over at Stephen F. Austin. I would like to say it was 3 years ago. Guy was shooting about 44% from three-point range, and Texas Southern has always been a team that has typically dominated on the glass. They've been a very good team defensively, and they left something to be desired on offense. Last year we saw a little bit of change over there. They were a team that was not very good on the glass. I do think that with this team being a year older and a year wiser, and Granger being a guy that was able to give the team 4.5 boards per contest last season, that is going to be seeing a little bit of a flip. But you've also got Kalen Farouk, who's back. 5.5 points, right around about 4.5 boards, a steal per contest. This team was generating more turnovers a season ago. Losing Kayvon McClain, that no doubt is going to be hurting this team, but I do think that Jackson Posey was very limited. He's only averaged about 5 points per contest last season. He's going to be able to take a little bit of a stride forward for this team, and I do think that there's a little bit of upside with some of the guys that they brought in as well. Zatarius Moultrie is going to be returning from a season ago as well, but they bring in a non-Division I guy that I really like in Jordan Garaki. Hopefully I said that correct. He's at 6'10", a guy that's able to do a nice job down low, and I think that that's going to help this team just really get back to the basics and really get back to, for lack of a better term, happy with them, as he's a guy that actually comes on over from the country of Canada, so that makes things all the more intriguing there. But at the junior college level, he was able to put up some nice boards, did a nice job of being able to block some shots. He should be able to elevate this team down low, and with the returning pieces that they've got in the backcourt, I do think that this is going to be a rock-solid season out there for Texas Southern. They always find themselves towards the top of the conference, even in an NIA quotes here down season. They were number 4 in the conference. Now, I think that this conference is much better this year than it was a season ago, but I think that they stay in that top 4. I've got Texas Southern at number 4 in terms of my projector finish. At number 3, I've got Southern. Now, Southern won the conference regular season last year. They were unable to bust through and make the NCAA tournament, but they returned darn near half their production from a season ago, and it was very much a whole is greater than the sum of its parts team. Like with Southern, you did not have a single guy average more than 11.3 points per game, and that guy was Michael Jacobs. He's going to be back in the fold for this team. Now, they do lose to Johnny DeMasi, who only played 8 games last season. If they would have been able to bring him back. That would have been the main facilitator that I feel like this team truly needed to be able to elevate and win the conference this season. But Cam and Broy along to Maury Jones, these are a pair of guys with some good versatility, and these are guys that are going to be back from a season ago. Both of these guys average about 7.5 points per contest. Jones is a guy that's going to give you a little bit more down low, about 4.6 rebounds per game. But that's another thing as well. Southern was actually a relatively good team on the glass. They had one of the best rebound rates of any mid-major team in all of college basketball. In terms of percentage of missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound, they were a top 50 team in the country with that regard, but they were also a team that did not have a single guy give you more than 4.7 rebounds per game, and Jones was one of their top guys. And Broy, he was able to give you about 2.5 assists per game. He figures to have the ball in his hands quite a bit along with Michael Jacobs, so these guys are going to be relatively rock solid with that regard. This is not a team that brings in a lot via the transfer portal, but the guy that they do bring in, I think actually is going to be able to fortify them a little bit more down low, and this is another name I'll probably have issues with. That's a commonality on this podcast. Malik Edgewald, he was over at UMass this last season, began his career over at Murray State, about 4.5 points, 5 rebounds per contest. He's not a guy that's really going to step out and shoot it from 3. He shot 23% from 3 last season. This is going to be a team that leaves a whole heck of a lot of something to be desired with regards to their outside shooting, but you bring back a 6'6" guy in AJ Barnes from a season ago, who was a nice rotation piece from last year, and then Joe Manning is another guy that returns to be able to help elevate that backcourt as well. So I do think that with Southern, that just overall cohesion is big for this team. This has been a team that has really been great at generating turnovers. Top 30 team once again last year in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. And Manning, who I mentioned before, he's really the top 3-point shooter at 41.3%. So this team has a lot of good things going for them, but again, not really the guy that I think is going to elevate them and get them above those top 2 teams. So I've got Southern at number 3 in terms of my projector finish. At number 2, I go with Jackson State. Jackson State returns a whole lot from last year, and Mo Williams is a coach of this team. Yes, that Mo Williams that used to play for the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Milwaukee Bucks. They bring back Deshaun Ruffin, a former top 75 recruit that began his career at Ole Miss. He was a little bit banged up towards the beginning part of the year last year, and that's been the biggest thing with him. Injuries, and he's not an amazing 3-point shooter, but he shoots right around 33% from 3, 85% the free throw line. In this conference, that's really good shooting. 15.5 points, 4 assists, stealing at per contest. Might be one of the most gifted guards they're going to find at the SWAC level, but Jamie Mitchell, Dorian McMillan, both of these guys return after combining for 20.5 points per contest. Both shot between 37.2 and 37.3% from 3-point range. Combined 8 rebounds per game. That's rock solid. Now, they lose Romeo Manciel. That was their top rebounder from a season ago, so that's a little bit of issue, but Kavion Hunt also returns after he was able to give the team some nice versatility, 2.5 assists, took the load off of Ruffin in terms of being able to help run that offense. Now, for Jackson State, they were turning the ball over about 14 times per game. They're going to need to work on that just a skosh, but this was a team that was relatively solid with regards to their interior defense as well. One of the better defensive teams they were going to find out there in the SWAC as well. They don't bring in quite the thunderous transfers of a few off seasons ago when they brought in Deshaun Ruffin and company, but they do bring in Devin Ree, and I do think that Devin Ree, coming on over from Louisiana Tech, he's going to be able to help elevate this team a little bit. I remember when he was over at Louisiana Tech, he was able to give the team a little bit of pop from 3-point range. 2 seasons ago, he was able to shoot 40.5% from 3-point range with 5.5 points per contest. Last year, took on a little bit more of, shall we say, a rebounding role, 4.3 rebounds per game at 6'8", so he's got a little bit of versatility and is someone that would actually began his career over at Louisville, a former top 175 recruit, so that should be able to help this team out a little bit. They have a lot of chemistry coming back, but again, little bit of question mark down low, which is why I've got them at number 2 in terms of my projector finish. And at number 1, I'm going with Bethune-Cookman. You just don't find this very often with Bethune-Cookman now having a pair of guys that began their career at the program. Actually, Zion Harmon did not begin his career at the program because he's been with about 17 different schools, but they were with the program, they transfer out, and then they boomerang transfer back. And you've got that with Jacoby Heedy along Zion Harmon. These 2 guys played for the program during the 2023-24 season, and when these guys played for Bethune-Cookman during the 2023-24 season, they were like fire and ice. You had Zion Harmon give the team 14.5 points, 4 assists as the main facilitator for the team, generating 1.7 steals per contest. Heedy at 6'6", a little bit of a do-it-all sort of joker player. 1.5 steals, 15.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game from that team. Oh yeah, and by the way, you're going to be returning quite a few guys from last season as well. So they are going to be bringing back Daniel Ruzon, who began his career over at Weber State. 5.5 boards, 12 points per contest, and you know what makes it all the better? They call him the doctor. Dr. Bradley led all of college basketball last year in terms of free throw attempts. Now, needs to work on the free throw shooting percentage, which was at 46.6%, but 10.7 free throws attempted per game last year. 19.5 points, 9.5 boards, 4.5 assists, 2.8 steals per contest at Arkansas Pine Bluff, where there was absolutely nothing around him over at Arkansas Pine Bluff a season ago. And oh, by the way, they're going to be bringing in Reggie Bass as well. Reggie Bass is someone that began his career over there in the MAC Conference. He's a guy that has a lot of, shall we say, experience. He was over at Lindenwood last year, 12.5 points per contest. He shot about 32.5% from three-point range. And here's the ultimate kicker for this team. They are going to be bringing in Ontario Morris. Now, for Ontario Morris, it's been a long and winding road, was very dominant at the non-Division I ranks over the last few seasons. Began his career over at Texas. He was dismissed from there in Kansas due to off-the-court sort of situations, but this is a former top 30 recruit, in some places a top 25 recruit that has a lot of upside. At 6'3", he's able to give you a little bit of three-point shooting, not the guy that's going to really facilitate or anything like that, but he should go very well with these guards. You've got that main point guard in Zion Harmon. I'm feeling very bullish about this Bethune-Cookman team. I have got them number one in terms of my projector finish, and that will wrap things up for the SWAC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters the name does not matter, so per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Herbert Seward. He does such an amazing job of taking a look at HBCU, both basketball and football. He joined me in the last segment, does great work with the HBCU Digital Network, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, and I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you.